June 10, 1912, 5 a.m., Sheriff Hank Horton approached the Moore house door, unaware he was about to witness how a single axe had ended the dreams of 8 innocent souls. The morning mist clung to Villisca like a shroud, but nothing could prepare him for the darkness waiting inside. Everyone knows that feeling of dread when something's terribly wrong. Even Sheriff Hank Horton felt his hands trembling as he reached for the doorknob that would change everything. Before starting the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. The silence was deafening. No children's laughter, no morning chatter, no signs of life from the Moore family home. Mary Peckman, the neighbor, had been calling for hours. They should be awake by now, she whispered to Sheriff Horton, her voice cracking with worry. Sheriff Hank Horton pushed open the unlocked door. The first thing that hit him wasn't the sight, it was the smell. Metallic, heavy, wrong. "Stay back, Mary," he commanded, his voice barely steady. The parlor looked normal, too normal. Chairs in place, everything tidy. But something was off. The windows were covered with clothing, blankets, anything that could block the light. But he hadn't seen the most shocking detail yet. The first victim. Sheriff Horton's boots creaked on the wooden floor as he moved deeper into the house. The silence pressed against his eardrums like cotton. Each step felt like walking into a tomb. Then he saw him. Josiah Moore lay in his bed, face crushed beyond recognition. The white pillowcase was soaked crimson, and beside the bed, an axe. Not just any axe, the Moore family's own axe taken from their woodshed. Sheriff Hank Horton had seen violence before, but this was methodical, personal. The killer had taken his time. "My God," he whispered, backing away from the bed. But that was only the beginning. He had 7 more bodies to discover, and each one would tell a different piece of this horrific puzzle. Wait until you hear what he found in the children's room, the children's nightmare. The stairs groaned under Sheriff Horton's weight as he climbed to the 2nd floor. His hand shook as he reached for the first bedroom door. Nothing could have prepared him for what waited inside. Herman and Catherine Moore, ages 11 and 10, lay in their beds, but unlike their father, they had been covered carefully with bedsheets after the attack. Someone had taken the time to tuck them in after killing them. Sheriff Hank Horton's knees nearly buckled. "What kind of monster?" he started, but couldn't finish. In the next room, Arthur and Boyd Moore, ages 7 and 5, the same scene, covered, protected in death by their own killer. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. In the guest room lay Einar and Lena Stillinger, ages 12 and 8, not even members of the family, just innocent children spending the night at their friend's house. And that's when Sheriff Horton noticed something that would haunt him forever. The killer had attempted to wash the blood from the axe in a basin of water, but more chilling, he had prepared bacon for breakfast and left it on the kitchen counter, as if planning to stay for a meal. This wasn't just murder. This was something far more sinister. But here's where everything you think you know gets turned upside down. Sheriff Hank Horton checked his pocket watch. 5:30 a.m. The Moores had returned from a church social at 9:30 p.m. the previous night. 8 hours. Somewhere in those 8 hours, someone had entered this house and systematically murdered 8 people. Yet no one heard screams. No one heard struggle. No one heard anything. The children had been struck while sleeping. Each victim showed signs of being killed in their beds. But how? How does someone commit such carnage in complete silence? The answer would shake the very foundation of what Sheriff Horton thought he knew about human nature, the evidence that made no sense. Sheriff Hank Horton walked through the house again, this time as an investigator, not just a horrified witness. Every detail mattered now. Every clue could lead to justice for these innocent souls. The front door, unlocked. The back door, locked from the inside. Every window, secured. How did the killer enter? How did he leave? In the parlor, a plate held 2 uneaten pieces of bacon. On the kitchen table, a bowl of bloody water where someone had attempted to clean the murder weapon. In the guest room, a suitcase had been moved, searched through, but the most disturbing evidence was what Sheriff Horton found in the barn. Cigarette butts, fresh ones. Someone had been watching the house, waiting, planning, and then he discovered something that changed everything he thought he knew about this case. The killer's signature. Every mirror in the house had been covered, every reflective surface draped with clothing or towels. The killer didn't want to see his reflection while committing these acts. Sheriff Hank Horton stared at a covered mirror in the hallway. Guilt, he wondered aloud. Shame, or something else entirely. The coverage was methodical, careful. This wasn't done in panic or haste. The killer had taken time with each mirror, each window, creating his own darkness to work in. But there was more. In each bedroom, the killer had covered the faces of the victims after death, not to hide his work, but to show respect, remorse, house. What were you thinking? Sheriff Horton whispered to the empty house. Who are you? He was about to discover that the killer might have left more than just bodies behind. The first suspect. By noon, half of Villisca had gathered outside the Moore house. Word travels fast in a town of 2,000 people, and news of 8 murders traveled like wildfire. It was Frank Jones, someone in the crowd whispered. Had to be. Frank Jones, local businessman, bitter enemy of Josiah Moore. They'd had a falling out over a business deal gone wrong. Jones had threatened Moore publicly just weeks before. Sheriff Hank Horton knew Jones personally. Hot-tempered, yes, violent, possibly, but capable of this level of methodical brutality. Bring him in, Sheriff Horton ordered his deputy. But when they arrived at Jones's house, they found him in his yard, tending to his garden, dirt under his fingernails, not a trace of blood anywhere. Sheriff, Jones said calmly, I heard about the Moores. Terrible thing. I was here all night with my wife. His alibi checked out, too perfectly. That's when Sheriff Horton realized this case was about to become much more complicated. The traveling killer. 3 days later, a telegram arrived that sent chills down Sheriff Hank Horton's spine. Similar murders reported Colorado Springs. Family of 4, axe used, faces covered, mirrors draped, suspect traveling east. The Burnham family in Colorado Springs, killed just days after the Moores, using identical methods. Then came reports from Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, a pattern emerging across the Midwest. Sheriff Horton spread the telegrams across his desk. We're not dealing with a local crime, he told his deputy. We're hunting a traveling killer. The suspect, Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the victims, a traveling preacher with a dark secret. Reports placed him in Villisca the night before the murders, asking about boarding houses, specifically about families with children. But just when Sheriff Horton thought he had his man, everything fell apart. They found Henry Lee Moore in Kansas City, rambling and incoherent, claiming responsibility for murders across 5 states. I killed them all, he confessed to Sheriff Hank Horton. The voices told me too. God's will, cleansing the earth. But when pressed for details about the Villisca murders, Moore's story crumbled. He described the house wrong, got the number of victims wrong, couldn't explain the bacon, the covered mirrors, the specific positioning of the bodies. Sheriff Horton leaned back in his chair, frustrated. He's confessing to crimes he didn't commit. Moore was mentally ill, seeking attention, or perhaps genuinely believing he was responsible for every unsolved murder in America. But he wasn't their killer. The real killer was still out there, and Sheriff Horton was running out of leads. The Reverend's secret. 6 months into the investigation, Sheriff Hank Horton received a letter that changed everything. Sheriff, you need to know about Reverend Kelly. He was at the church social that night. He walked the Stillinger girls home. He was the last person to see them alive. Reverend Lyn George Kelly, traveling minister who had preached at the Villisca Presbyterian Church the night of the murders. Charismatic, beloved by the children, trusted by the community. But Sheriff Horton began digging into Kelly's past and found disturbing patterns. Every town Kelly visited seemed to experience unexplained incidents involving children. Nothing prosecuted, but whispers, rumors, families suddenly leaving town. He's been hiding in plain sight, Sheriff Horton realized. Kelly had motive, opportunity, and method. He knew the family's routines, had access to their trust, could enter the house without suspicion. But proving it would require Sheriff Horton to confront the darkest possibility of all, the trial that shook America. 2 years later, Reverend Kelly stood trial for the Villisca Axe Murders. Sheriff Hank Horton testified about the evidence, the timeline, the pattern of covering victims and mirrors. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor declared, this man used his position of trust to gain access to innocent families, then committed unspeakable acts under cover of darkness. But Kelly's defense was masterful. No fingerprints, forensic science was primitive in 1912. No witnesses to the actual murders, all circumstantial evidence. Kelly himself took the stand, calm and composed. I am a man of God. I dedicate my life to protecting children, not harming them. I was asleep in my hotel room when these terrible crimes occurred. The jury deliberated for days. The entire nation watched. And then came the verdict that no one expected. The acquittal. Not guilty. Sheriff Hank Horton felt his heart sink as the jury foreman read the verdict. Kelly walked free, cleared of all charges, his reputation intact. There wasn't enough evidence, the jury foreman explained later. Suspicion isn't proof. We couldn't convict a man of God on circumstantial evidence alone. Kelly left Villisca that same day, never to return. He continued his ministry in other states, other towns, other communities with families and children. Sheriff Horton watched him leave from his office window. "I know it was you," he whispered, "and somewhere, somehow, the truth will come out." But the truth would prove more elusive than anyone imagined. New suspects emerge. Over the following years, new suspects emerged with each new investigation. William Blackie Mansfield, a cocaine-addicted drifter who fit the physical description given by witnesses. Andy Sawyer, a local man with a history of mental illness and violent outbursts. Sheriff Hank Horton interviewed them all, studied their alibis, examined their motives, but each lead ended the same way, close but not conclusive. "Maybe we're looking at this wrong," Sheriff Horton told his deputy one evening, reviewing the case files for the 100th time. "Maybe it wasn't about the Moors specifically. Maybe they were just convenient." The randomness of it haunted him. Why this family? Why this night? Why such brutal efficiency combined with bizarre ritual behavior? And then, 30 years later, a deathbed confession would reopen everything. The deathbed confession. Rhondda Sheriff Hank Horton, now retired but still haunted by the case, received a phone call that made his blood run cold. "Sheriff, this is Father McKenna at St. Mary's Hospital. We have a dying man here who says he knows about the Villisca murders, says he has to tell someone before he dies." The man was William Mansfield, now on his deathbed, wasted by years of drug abuse and hard living. "I was there that night," Mansfield whispered to Sheriff Horton. "I know who did it. It was me and my partner. We thought the family had money hidden in the house. We were wrong." Sheriff Horton leaned closer. "Tell me everything. We waited until they were asleep, used their own axe so it wouldn't be traced to us. But when we realized there was no money, we couldn't leave witnesses. Not 8 of them, but even this confession contained details that didn't quite fit. The final mystery." Mansfield's confession explained the break-in, the robbery gone wrong, the use of the family's axe. But it didn't explain the covered mirrors, the careful placement of bedsheets over victims, the breakfast bacon left on the counter. "Those details," Mansfield said weakly. "That was my partner, had strange habits, said the mirrors watched him work, said the dead needed to be kept warm." "Who was your partner?" Sheriff Horton demanded. But Mansfield died before he could answer, taking the final piece of the puzzle with him to the grave. Sheriff Hank Horton stood by the hospital bed, staring down at the man who might have been one of America's most brutal killers, or simply another false confessor seeking absolution for a crime he didn't commit. The truth about Villisca would remain buried forever. The legacy of fear. Today, 11 and 10 years later, the Villisca Axe Murder House still stands. Tourists come from around the world to spend the night in the rooms where 8 innocent people died. They report strange sounds, unexplained shadows, the feeling of being watched. Some claim to hear children's voices in the night, or the sound of an axe being sharpened in the barn. Sheriff Hank Horton passed away in 1967, never knowing for certain who killed the Moore family and the Stillinger girls. His final case notes, discovered after his death, contained a single haunting line: "The killer is still among us. He walks free, knowing he committed the perfect crime, but perfect crimes don't exist, only crimes we haven't solved yet." The Villisca Axe murders remain officially unsolved to this day. 8 innocent lives lost, countless suspects investigated, multiple confessions recorded, but the truth remains as elusive as it was on that terrible morning in June 1912. Some mysteries are meant to haunt us forever, reminding us that evil can strike anywhere, anytime, against anyone, even in the safest small town in America. The axe may be silent now, but the questions it raised will echo through eternity.